It's a common misconception that the winter is a time for becoming more. In fact, it's a time for seeing what no longer survives, for stripping back the inessential, the impure, and the irrelevant to see what lies underneath. And in this sense, personal alchemy is actually mostly subtraction. It's a time of year when societal conventions would tell us that we need to be optimizing, growing, developing, acquiring new skills, habits, patterns of behaviour, belief systems, entire modes of thought, all in the name of a New Year's resolution, New Year's aspiration, New Year's intentions, even words of the year, which people are now starting to project onto their lives as a way to have a non-linear direction. Even this defeats the point. Because personal alchemy was never about adding more or improving oneself intentionally. Personal alchemy is about distillation. It's about simplification. It's about erosion. It's about stripping back to the core foundation of who we were all along. Personal alchemy for Jung was this idea of individuation. So for Jung, individuation was a lifelong process. It was a cyclical process. It was non-linear, non-direct, and he made the caveat to us pretty early on that we were never going to reach the goal, even at the very end. This is a lifelong process, and one that you can do indefinitely, because you can always work towards becoming a better version of who you are. For Jung, individuation can best be explained through the concept of circumambulation. Circumambulation was this ancient practice from India, thousands of years ago, in which some of the early precursors to Hinduism and Buddhism would walk around a sacred object inside a temple, following it, keeping the object on their right, and following the motion of the cosmos and the stars above in an attempt to reach a higher ascendancy, to land on the spiritual plane, to gain a sense of clarity, spiritual connection, and a deeper sense of well-being. For Jung, as for us, circumambulation is a more metaphorical process. This lifelong mission that we have to become a clearer, truer sense of ourselves, this begins with the most indirect of approaches. Circumambulation requires us to walk around the possibilities of who we can become, to follow the infinite potential, and in doing so, to strip back the layers, the noise, the distractions, and the obstacles of who we never were to begin with. All of the personas that we acquire, the egoic sense of self, the values that we inherit, the imagined futures that we construct for ourselves, these are all antithetical to the process of circumambulation. They are the obstacles which lie in wait, which need to be eroded through the process of individuation. It's not just a process of gaining this insight introspectively, but taking action on it. And it's a process that will continue for the rest of our lives. When we go through this process, we find ourselves not dissolving a problem entirely, but passing it and returning to it as we come round once again. When this happens, we've already eroded a lot of the noise and distractions that came with it, and hopefully we've begun to integrate some of the learnings from it, so that when we return to the problem, or when we're confronted by it, months or years down the line, we can do so with a smile and a clearer sense of how to deal with the problem. This is akin to Rudyard Kipling's famous poem in which he talks about returning to an old and familiar place, and through the journey and the exploration, through the quest, the adventure of a lifetime, you come to know this place as if for the first time once again. So once we do this, once we start to erode all of the noise, all of the distractions that caused unknown damage to our true Tao, to our true journey, we are of course confronted with a sense of grief and loss. We realise that the values that we held dear were imagined, fiction to begin with. We realise that the futures that we had constructed for ourselves were paper thin and could be easily collapsed. And with this loss, we have to address the grief that comes with it. The tragedy of losing everything that we've been working towards and having to start again with a new and fresh perspective. And this is why I believe that the winter is the perfect time to start this process of personal alchemy. Because for the Taoists in China, personal alchemy could take place in the winter when you are stripped down to your core foundation. The winter, in Taoism, is the season that comes after the autumn, the season of grief, the season of loss. As the leaves fall from the tree, the impurities of life are stripped away and washed by, and you are left in the winter, in the murky depths of the winter season, with little more than the foundational blueprint of who you always were, the essence of you, the essence of your ancestors, and the most clear and unobtrusive version of what it is that you need to be doing. This is the perfect place to start a wellspring for the year ahead, not by layering new skills and habits and beliefs in a desperate attempt to impress yourself, if not others, but instead by stripping back all of the non-essential material and arriving through circumambulation at a place where you can dissolve the egoic stories you tell yourself, remove the chatter and the clutter and the noise, and give yourself the best wide perspective to start the year in earnest. And I talked in a previous video about how the winter is a time for contained activation. This is not a time for overreach, it's not a time for stretching too far, diminishing what resources you have in an attempt to start the year on the right foot, because this is a cyclical process. The very nature of the seasons will always continue. And so a new year is purely numerical fantasy. It doesn't mean anything in terms of you, in terms of your narrative or your life journey. The age that you are currently is completely obsolete. It has no bearing. Because if you begin the process of circumambulation now, you're going to get to the end and know that you've been following the right path all along, regardless of when you joined it. My advice for people for the winter is to start by taking a more introspective approach to who you are, to start to draw up a list of all the problems that confound you and all of the inessential things that you do, the inessential ways that you are, and the inessential stories that you tell yourself that are actually an impediment and an obstacle to stepping into your truer self. Once you start to do this, you've already begun the process of erosion, and personal alchemy and the magic that comes from it can start to begin.